Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum, where all voices matter. Can Canada afford another lost economic decade? Our next guest recently delved into Canada's productivity crisis. Please welcome Taylor Jackson. He's a policy analyst and research manager at the Hub digital news outlet. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Tony. It's great to be here.
I guess, first of all, you wrote that it's been a lost economic decade for Canada. What are the main attributes and causes of this situation?
Well, first, the big thing we looked at is real per capita GDP, a standard measure of how our living standards are, how well off Canadians are. And what we found is that it's been in decline for several quarters and a couple years now. And roughly our living standards are about the same as what they were in 2014. And so this begs the question of what's going on, what's behind this. And a chief reason is low productivity growth. Productivity you can think of as, how much can we produce with how many inputs? And the fewer inputs we use to produce something, the better off we are economically. And that our growth in terms of productivity has been slowing. And we're actually in a bit of a relative decline and stagnation compared to our peers. So in 1970, our output per worker, a standard measure of productivity called labor productivity, was roughly 85% of what it was in the United States.
Right.
Today, Canadian workers are roughly 70% as productive as their American peers. So we're losing ground on this productivity measure, and there's real consequences for Canadian incomes.
And it's not just vis-a-vis the U.S. I gather other main, economies are doing better than Canada right now on this measure.
Exactly. It's also our G7 competitors as well as several other countries. And this has consequences. This has consequences for how well the Canadian economy is going to grow in the future. So the OECD recently projected that of its roughly 40 members, Canada is going to have the slowest growth in real per capita GDP out to 2060. We're talking 40 years of stagnant growth in living standards relative to our peers, and that productivity component is a big part of that.
Right. Now, Taylor, you wrote in the article that I read that this kind of stagnation causes both economic and political challenges for the country. What did you mean by that?
Absolutely. So slow growth and stagnant living standards, our worry is that this produces sort of zero-sum thinking. I'm not getting something from the government. I need to take something away from someone else. And this produces, politics of polarization, which we're a lot of talk about right now. Can produce radicalism, can produce short-termism that's trying to boost groups. And, Sean and I, the co-author on this piece, we actually took a bit of a deep dive into Canada's latest happiness figures and rankings. And I think we're starting to see some of these dynamics play out here. So overall, in the latest World Happiness Report, Canada ranks 50. Our overall happiness has been in decline since about 2010, our ratings of how happy we are. But what's fascinating is the growing gap between young and old. So typically when economists or psychologists look at happiness, you tend to be really happy when you're young, things are looking up, you're excited, not too many responsibilities yet. Your happiness begins to decline in your middle ages, you're working, you're trying to build your career, you've got a mortgage, you're raising kids, and then it starts to move back up in your older years as you're retired, you're with your grandkids, you're enjoying life a little bit more. In Canada, we're actually seeing quite a stark decline in young happiness relative to old happiness. So if you look at older Canadians, those over 60, overall in the world, their happiness ranks 8th. If you look at young Canadians or those under 30, their happiness ranks 58. There's a 50 spot gap between young and old in Canada that is growing over time. And it didn't used to be this way before 2010. Young and old Canadians were roughly as happy. So when we talk about slow growth, stagnant living standards, the affordability challenges, I do think we're starting to see this manifest in other social aspects like our happiness, our life satisfaction, et cetera.
Yeah, and we've got coming up to a break here, but that what you're saying is that plays out in terms of the political debate as well.
Absolutely, I think it does. I mean, I think we're seeing it in the push for increasing affordability, certainly on housing, pushback against NIMBYism that we're seeing from governments. That's a chief concern, but I think we're going to see it in other areas as well.
Right.